What a beautiful Sunday morning it is. Full of warmth and coolness and life and light and the stillness of spring water. Leaving the house this morning, driving up the hill and making that sharp turn at the top of Moose Hill, there was a big dog running out of the driveway, almost jumping at the car. This is how it felt. I'd never seen him before, and I was startled. Slowed down, almost came to a stop, and he just looked, his tail wagging. And then I slowly started driving, and he slowly started running. And I drove faster, and he ran faster, and I drove fast, and he ran so fast. I was afraid he would run into the car, so I honked. And like a good pedestrian, he moved over and kept on running. It was a beautiful sight, such exuberance in moving, and the muscles of the body, the fur sparkling in the sunshine. Finally, I went ahead of him, and he stopped and looked for a moment. He turned around, slowly trotted back to the house. And there are the little creeks in the ditches, the water streaming. Right now, almost everywhere around here, there's water streaming someplace. The melted snow and fresh rain moving downhill. It really seems, doesn't it, that people and dogs and water loves to run. I met joggers too. This joy of moving. And even if you're not able to run anymore, which happens, it doesn't matter, because all the running and moving is there as we look around and listen. In the space of stillness. Does that make sense? Watching the movement in the space of stillness. Watching movement of thoughts and sensations. And people and birds and trees in the wind. Without moving. Quietly, without needing to judge, right or wrong. In this first week of the on period, there are quite a few meetings where people were worrying or wondering whether this cascading of thoughts can ever stop. expressing the desire that it do so, and understanding at the same time the conflict that this brings. If we desire something that is not happening, we observe and experience the movement of thought and the instant hooking up with emotions, sensations, feelings, and this endless chain of cause and effect. More thoughts, more emotions, more thoughts. And the yearning, the longing for a quiet space, which is not troubled by any of that. And yet wondering whether that yearning itself is part of the problem. Moving away from what is. Most of us here, I think I can safely assume, have had training elsewhere. This place is not a training center. But most of us have had training, spiritual training, in sitting quietly, practicing, trying to perfect a practice with the ultimate goal of reaching enlightenment, liberation, freedom from the drudgery and suffering of the me. That is the content of most spiritual training and teaching. And I happened to come upon this article here in a publication that's called What is Enlightenment? This is an extra print. And when I read the first article, I thought this is something to bring up in a talk and to discuss, to dialogue about later. And I'll read a few paragraphs of this. This is written by Elizabeth Diebold, who is a Muslim. And she starts the article with a quotation. At the bottom it says, Hadith. I don't know who Hadith is. But it says, upon returning from the battle of Badr, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, we have returned from the lesser jihad, in parenthesis, holy war, to the greater jihad, unquote. They asked, O Prophet of God, which is the greatest jihad? And he replied, the struggle against the nafs, and in parenthesis, ego. The Islam word for ego apparently is nafs or nafs. And she continues, when the first of the two world trade towers crumpled and fell in on itself like a hollow toy, I watched as millions did in disbelief and horror as jihad exploded on American soil. Jihad, the holy war, born with Islam when the Roman Empire became holy by adopting Christianity, took a burning leap into the 21st century. Television coverage of jets igniting modern monoliths replaced ancient images of swords clashing in the desert. Struggling to recognize the reality, what it was that I was seeing, I asked what so many of us were asking: how could human beings do such a thing? And met in myself the stark recognition that actually I knew how it could happen. No, I don't have a secret life as an arsonist or a history of violent crime. You see, jihad doesn't just refer to Islamic fundamentalist war upon the infidels. The truer, greater meaning of jihad refers to the battle for the utter liberation of the spirit from the tyrannical nafs, the unconscious motivation in the human psyche that insists on separation and division. The nafs, or ego, is the ultimate terrorist, changing disguises with shape-shifting ease, scurrying within the labyrinth of the mind, setting off explosions of fear and rage, never quite visible, until war has been declared and a warrant for its capture, dead or alive, has been issued. Sounds improbable? Believe me, I had no idea that such an entity existed within the human psyche, let alone my very own psyche. Even though I nodded at the appropriate moments whenever my teacher or anyone else spoke about the ego's evil ways, frankly, I didn't really take seriously the fact that I had an ego. Such is human pride, no matter that Muhammad and every major religious tradition and even my own teacher warned of the ego's wiles and the necessity to wield a sword. I knew better. From the Lord Krishna commanding Arjuna in battle in the Bhagavad Gita, to the fierce Zen masters of Japan and China, good and evil to Christianity's version of the same, from Saint Teresa of Avila to Carlos Castaneda's Don Juan, the metaphorical battlefield is rife with the images, injunctions, and inspirations of a rich legacy of spiritual warriors who have left their mythic mark on the pages of our religious history. Each of these teachings and legends makes it perfectly clear that the spiritual life is a fight to the death, a war between good and evil, a true and bloody battle that takes place in the soul of the aspirant. Later on, she still says, and then I'll stop. The point of the religious traditions make and illustrate through wild images of Tibetan demons, satanic spirits, and the personification of the 7 deadly sins is that there is something fundamental within each of us that must be named, faced, and conquered in order to free the human spirit. How does these words speak to us? The sound of an airplane. And the momentary holding of breathing in the listening. And then breathing again. The hands on the knees, the cloth. Maybe thoughts arising. How do we meet it all? Or do we need to meet it at all? Do we need to fight ourselves, assuming that there is an entity within us that needs to be conquered and defeated? Thrown out, dead or alive. Do we see right now as the words flow about this entity within me, quote unquote? I've never found such an entity. Do we realize that the wording, the entity of ego within me, within the human psyche, is itself thought, the product of thinking? Can we see this right now, verify it? Or do you say, whoa, wait a minute. I know there is such a thing as an ego within me. Well, that's knowing, and knowing is part of thinking, or having thought. Having fixated and thought the idea of an ego within me that needs to be found, named, and extirpated. Banned forever. Do we see that this is thinking, the product of thinking? Do we see that right now? And by seeing, I don't mean visually. Realizing that thought is necessary to think about me, my evil ways or my good ways, my thoughts, me as the thinker. And there shouldn't be a thinker, at least he or she shouldn't think thoughts. What is it that we discover within as some silence, as some of the hectic, resisting thoughts quiet down? They may not quiet down. They may first need to be discovered. Maybe in a very gross manner. What is resistance? It's ever finer degrees to the most subtle, bracing, barricading against something that I don't want to face. And what I don't want to face are remembered experiences or mannered, conditioned behavior. I react to something and I haven't wanted to react this way. It doesn't conform to my image. Before the idea of how I should act can act out, a reaction has already happened. Do you know that? Of course we all do, don't we? Responding, and we don't want to respond this way. Reacting, and we haven't wanted to react in this way. So, can we begin to watch this stuff without holding on to an idea of how we ought to be? This may be the most essential task of what we call the work of this moment. Not to be tied to the idea of how I want to be, how I want to sound, what I ought to say, what I shouldn't say. Can we see that? How strapped in this human being is by ideas, lodged not just in the brain. The tentacles go to every cell of this body. I shouldn't. I mustn't. I did something wrong. Wrong meaning not conforming to what I think is right. What I've been told is right. Or wrong. And being tied to these images very deeply, very profoundly prevents watching, innocently if you will, what actually happens from moment to moment. What I just said, how I reacted, or the hostility within which hasn't been expressed, but it's there, but I don't want to face it. Not an entity being hostile, but hostile thoughts, feelings, angry thoughts and feelings. Somebody just told me this week, amazing to see how many angry thoughts rumble around in his mind. But when they're seen, they don't have to be expressed. They can sort of melt away like the snow in spring. So where is this entity that we are admonished in our spiritual training to fight? Fight to the death. Fight with a sword. Something comes to mind. I remember the whole saying, Jesus saying something like, I have not come to bring such and such. Maybe you can provide it. I have come to bring us the sword. Don't take me wrong. I've brought the sword. To separate the good from the evil. And we were in our particular Zen training, because one of the preceding teachers had worded it this way, if you work very hard in a sesshin, this is a 7-day intense period of practicing. If you work very hard, or maybe over the years, many years, then finally you come to this hand-to-hand combat with the ego. And I never knew what that was. Because hand-to-hand combat never happened here for some reason. There was, from the beginning, the great urgency or interest to watch what was happening, to attend to the thoughts and feelings. And maybe let that energy that was building up in the sitting transform itself into awareness, attention, to see and to let go, which is not an act of will. There's no will in that. There's no me thoughts. Seeing what is going on, an angry thought or an ambitious motive. When seen, don't need to carry on. They may not. It all depends on the strength of the presence and the interest to see it through. Not stop midway, meaning not seeing the resistance that begins to come up. Fearful ideas. What will happen to me? or I ought to express this, imagery, what I should be like. You just watch it. I can't say it for you. We have to all see for ourselves this amazing happening of transparency, inner transparency, in which thoughts and motives are revealed, not combated, not eliminated, seen, irradiated with attention. Whether they are continuing or stopping, what is going on? What is going on? This moment of attending without knowing the next moment. You don't have to know the next moment. The next moment is this. There is no next moment. There is no past moment. There is only this. And maybe there are thoughts arising, maybe not. It doesn't matter. What matters is that there is presence and transparency. Not to see ourselves as this or that. That's not transparency. That's blockage. I'm this, I'm that. That it hinders our action. It channels it artificially into pathways that another aspect of ourselves doesn't even want. We don't even want to sound this way or talk that way. So what are we when we don't know what we are? Or what's happening right now when we don't know what we are? And we don't need to know in this compulsive way. What am I? What am I? What am I is an opening of not knowing. What do you call kulissen? On a stage, backdrop and side drops just vanish. The curtain vanishes. The audience, oneself, is just what is here right now. Some movement of people, a few little birds. Hear them. Ch-ch. And the breathing. Ch-ch-ch-ch. There. There. Somebody asked, why do you usually refer to things that are happening outside? I'm more inward, in touch with what's going on inside. Well, to tell you the truth, these birds are also inside. Drop inside and outside completely. The breathing and the chirping and the moving and the heart beating. Isn't it all right here? Where is the borderline? There's none. And if you feel there is, what is it? And don't tackle it. Try to storm or break through the wall. Listen to the sounds of the wall. Somebody told me that this week. I have no picture of the person, but I remember what they said. It is like a wall. I feel so numb, so cut off. And the question that came was, how does that wall feel? What's the feeling of numbness? You don't have to put it into words. Very difficult to put numbness into words. But something is there, isn't it? And can it be listened to silently? Lovingly, if you will. You may say, I feel anything but loving right now. That's all right. How does it feel? What is it? This moment of not knowing.